Hey everybody, welcome to the season 5 premiere of the Indispensable Conversation. It's so great to have you here today, and my special guest for this moment in time is none other than Alain Hunkins. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Alain, he's a Forbes contributor. He's the author of a terrific book called Cracking the Leadership Code. He's a keynote speaker extraordinaire. He's able to sort of kindle the fire of brilliance within any audience member that has the opportunity to see him. So he's really, really a top-notch leadership thinker. And it's this very background that makes him the absolute perfect guest to wrestle with this question today. And that's, should an unschooled leader be put into position to lead others? Welcome to the show, Alain.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We've had the chance to talk here and there over the last few years, and it's always been, I feel anyway, a terrific exchange of good thinking. So I can't wait to hop right in. Let's go with that first question. Alain, should unschooled leaders be put into position to lead others?
Well, you picked a super provocative question because I think we have to unpack a couple of the pieces of this question as we get into it. And the first part I want to get into is this sense of unschooled, right? So if we think about this idea of where do leaders go to school, like what would a schooled leader look like? And so to me, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, the way humans pretty much learn our schooling. I should air quotes in both hands. Our schooling really is school of life, right? And so it's a lot of, we tend to learn from the inherited history from the people around us. And so the challenge or a problem with that is if we just take that at full stop without considering the source and what they're learning, is this good, is this bad? It's going to get in the way, right? So the first thing is unschooled, like, where is our schooling? And then the question is, do people being put into this position to lead others, this is the classic trap that we see happens all the time, which is someone is good at what they do. So we'll call them a good doer. And you could be a good doer in any function, right? You could be a good doer salesperson. You could be a good doer software engineer, you name it. You could be a good doer anything. Like, let's say, Jim, you're a salesperson. Like, Jim, you're a really good salesperson. In fact, you're so good. What we want to do now is we're going to promote you to lead the sales team, right? So this idea of, okay, so hold on. Where have you been schooled to lead a sales team? You haven't. And so what ends up happening is a lot of good doers try to keep doing what they did when they're in leadership roles. And that is a recipe for failure, because what are you going to do when you're in that? You're going to rely on the things, or as Marshall Goldsmith loved to say, right, what got you here won't get you there, right? And so there's got to be a shift. And I think, to me, this whole idea of leadership development, the word that underpins all of that to me is intentional, right? Because you can be an accidental leader and you might be, okay at times with certain things. But what do you do when the waves get really rough and you're stuck in a struggle? Like, if everything's easy, no problem. But when it's tough, what are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? So I think this idea of being intentional it's hard. And a lot of leaders, they're so busy doing the what of their doing, like their job, like I'm doing this. They don't spend, I always assume when I go in and talk with leaders that they have thought about leadership development more. And I'm sure you find this too, Jim, with your clients. Turns out they don't spend a whole lot of thinking about how they go about doing what they do. It's a lot of the what, but there's very little on the how. There's very little on the process of actually leading.
So let's get into that a little bit. And I think, the very first point you made is really an important one. I can't tell you how many clients have expressed frustration with the fact that either they were put into leadership role without any training, or B, their people are frustrated because they know they're working for someone who's really not schooled, quote unquote. And I'll use my finger quotes too, right? And again, I mean, it's tongue in cheek when I say schooled. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
part of the draw of the show is to try to press some buttons. But the reality of it is, yeah, a lot of HR systems don't have a way to reward people who are outstanding individual contributors.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, they move them into leadership roles, and they can really mess up the place
Yeah.
if they're not, careful. So yeah, I think the leadership development thing is sort of one side of this picture, and then I also think personalized coaching is another one. I mean, I think you need both. And
Yeah.
you think about world class athletes. I mean, Tiger Woods still has a swing coach.
Yeah.
So coaching's not this thing that people should be thinking is a bad thing because I need a coach, that means I'm not performing well. No,
Right.
you need a coach so you can perform even better, so you
Yeah.
move from great to excellent.
Yeah.
Um so so yeah so I think there's some risks in putting people in spots when they haven't been properly trained, and that's sort of the next question. What do you see as some of those risks for businesses that put folks in that really aren't prepared yet to lead others?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of the risks, there's a few, and like in the research that I've been doing, there's a few things that come out. Number one is retention, right? So it
Mhm.
turns out that you put a bad person in that role, and let's say, when I say bad, let's just call it what it is. Let's say toxic, like particularly bad, right?
Mm,
Like, so it turns out the number one reason that people leave the workplaces is because they're toxic, and the number
mhm.
one behavior of a toxic person is lack of respect. And I just want
Yeah.
to touch back on something you mentioned too, Jim, earlier, which is the sense of, a lot of companies don't have systems where individual contributors can stay individual contributors and still get advancements and promotions. And unfortunately, in too many
Right.
organizations, I'm sure you see this too, in too many organizations, the only way to grow, aka get promoted, aka get more money, get prestige, is to go into a people leadership role. And as you know, a lot of people who are in people leadership roles just don't like people that much. And I say, like, look, if you don't like people,
Yeah.
then don't be a people leader. And if you have people who are in leadership roles who really just don't like people, get them
Mhm.
out, because you can bang your head all day. It's a square peg in a round hole,
Yeah.
and it's not going to work. So anyway, that just, I want to touch on that. But yeah, going back to the big impact, you got retention. You're also in terms of hiring, because
Mm,
in this age of transparency with LinkedIn and Indeed and Glassdoor, you know, any prospective employee is checking out the Glassdoor reviews. And
yeah.
if you have people who are, blowing up the place, we're going to hear about it. There's so much more transparency than there used to be.
Mm,
And so you have to be really aware of that, has to how that plays out. And then the third thing is, what if you have people who aren't equipped, what is that going to do for your ability to develop the bench strength of
right.
leaders for the future? So those are the areas that I think that really show up. It's
Yeah.
leadership bench strength, hiring, and retention, and not
I,
and you can put engagement underneath all of that.
yeah. No, I'm with you. And to your point, right? All the research is pointing to the fact that people leave their leaders. They're not really leaving their quote unquote company. They're leading.
Yeah,
They're leaving the people who are leading them because they're frustrated by
yeah,
how they're being treated. And I think that's really a huge risk. And on top of the three that you mentioned, there's a performance impact. If you've got a bunch of people that aren't motivated
yeah,
in any part of your business, it's underperforming.
yeah,
And if you have several of those in dangerous spots, now you're really in trouble. So yeah, I'm going to circle all the way back to that first word, and I think it's a really important one. Maybe it's a theme for this whole indispensable conversation, but it's about being deliberate,
yeah,
deliberately developing people who have the skills to lead, motivate, inspire others.
yeah.
Um, let's get into that a little bit. What do you think are sort of the innate qualities that can compensate for an absence of formal training?
Well, we'll start. And again, I think about this, and this is all based on having worked with, over
Yeah,
25 years of like, thousands of groups. And,
yeah,
at its core, if you think about what is leadership, right? It isn't about your position. It isn't about your title. ultimately, what is it? It's a relationship between two human beings. You just mentioned that, people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses, right? So what is that? It's a relationship between the leader and the person who chooses, and I say choose very intentionally, right? Chooses to follow, because every single day we choose to loan our talents or not, or a certain percentage of our talents or not. And in terms of our ability to perform, so that's all based there. So I think the first thing is knowing that if leadership is a relationship, we have to create stronger human to human connection. So at its core, it's connection. And connection is about, how are we building effective relationships? How are we building trust? And I'm not just talking about the trust where I can predict, like, oh, Jim says he'll be at a meeting at 10 a.m. He's there. That's one type of trust. We'll call that predictive trust. But the other kind of trust is that I have a relationship with you, Jim, where I can say, hey, Jim, I'm not sure what to do here, or I think I'm at a minute, being vulnerable and being able to model that vulnerability for people. So I think it really starts, at the core, it starts with connection, and we could build from there. But I just wanted to pause there because I think without connection, everything else is commentary. It doesn't really get there.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'll kind of riff on that a little bit with you. I think some of the innate qualities in really superior leaders and folks that maybe haven't been formally trained but yet are very effective boils down to the EQ stuff.
Yeah.
It's that emotional intelligence, the ability to communicate and connect, like you say.
Yeah.
That's the foundation, I think, of any really effective, if you will, unschooled leader.
Yeah.
But you can then take that foundation and expand it and more powerfully and more effectively for the business by putting on top of that foundation some really formal, training and coaching
Mm-hmm.
to really help the person hone skills they don't otherwise have in being able to lead and inspire others. And again, it moves somebody from being an okay leader to one that's exceptional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what you think are some of the elements of proper, if you will, leadership training. What would be the right kind of program, if you would, to bring into an organization to help develop leaders?
Well, ideally, you're starting with a snapshot, right? A kind of a current state snapshot. And there's lots of different, whether they're assessment tools, 360s, there's a lot of things to give people the opportunity to see, like, where are we now? And because one of the biggest challenges that many leaders face is we call it, the gap between what they intend or how they see themselves and how other people see them. And at the end of the day, if leadership is a relationship, it isn't about what I think of myself, it's how do other people see me. And so what these assessments do is provides a lot more clarity and truth in where are you and where are you struggling. And then that is a really good place to start. Now, depending on the type of program we're looking to build out, then we kind of figure out what do we need to do in terms of shoring up weaknesses, in terms of developing strengths. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, I'm sure you do this with your coaching clients too. I mean, I do this with coachees as well. It's just like trying to figure out, okay, so where are we going to focus? Where are we going to get the proverbial best bang for the buck in terms of our time? Because this is a lifetime endeavor, but what's going to help you the most moving forward? And generally, when I'm talking with clients, I would say a couple of the areas that tend to show up a lot. One is around communication. Most people think they're better communicators than they are. That's because everything is clear in your mind because you live in your brain 24/7, 365, but no one else does. And so realizing how often misunderstanding is the default setting. I like to tell leaders when I'm training and coaching them that assume misunderstanding. Because if you go in assuming misunderstanding, you're going to be a lot better off. Because if you assume understanding, you're gonna be disappointed, and you're also going to get really lousy results because that's the platform on which we make all decisions. And so and I'd say so. Generally, it's funny because like whenever I build out leadership programs, generally communication is an integral part of that because a lot of people never thought about, oh, I never understood why people don't get it, or how often people say things like, well, I sent the email, they should know what to do. It's like, you sent an email, doesn't mean squat until somebody understands what the meaning is and then acts on it. So there's a lot of different pieces to this, also. So communication is another piece. And then beyond that as well, I would say, what are things as a leader you're doing to create environments where people can collaborate well. Right?
Mm,
And so it turns out, and that takes a certain understanding of the human psyche in terms of what do people have in terms of basic fundamental human needs, that when those needs are met, people perform better. And when there's
mm,
needs are not met, they perform
mhm,
worse. And
right,
so understanding, and so I like to think of these things again. My model is connection, communication, collaboration. I think of these as meta skills. And then underneath each of them, there are specific, practical, tangible things you can do. So, for example, under collaboration, I'm sure we've all had this experience. Something as simple as, let's say you have a meeting planned with people and it's 3 hours long. Okay. Have you, as a leader, going back to your word, deliberate, going, well, human beings can't function for 3 hours at a clip. Did I schedule a break about 80 to 90
mm,
minutes in? Because there's no way we're going to have diminishing returns. And again, great leaders are intentional and conscious about doing that deliberately. And bad leaders are just like, why is everyone checking out? Does everyone need a break? And it's like 2 hours in, you realize you've wasted the last 45 minutes because
right,
no one's been following. So
yeah,
it's just, and that's just a simple example. And there's hundreds of things. There's hundreds of things that we can do. And ultimately, what separates out the bad leaders? It's funny because we could talk about this all day. And I don't think any listener here would go, wow, that's brand new information. I didn't know that. I mean, for the most part,
right,
most of this stuff is stuff we know. It's just, are we doing it? And are we doing it consistently?
right.
Are you making leadership a deliberate daily habit?
Exactly. And, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of folks who are in leadership roles go through the motions
Yeah.
and they're not thinking about it deliberately. It's not a conscious choice.
Yeah.
And I've got book number seven's coming out in August.
Awesome.
It's a tips book, a leadership tips book. And the first tip is leadership is a choice.
Yeah.
And that's something that I feel needs to be hammered in to anybody in the role. Like,
Yeah.
you're choosing to be the leader here,
Yeah.
and now we're going to help you. In regard to the question, though, the training components, I believe that leadership development training certainly has a place in corporate America,
Hmm.
right? I don't think it delivers on the promises across the board. I don't believe that sending somebody to a class for a week is going to necessarily make them a better leader.
Yeah.
But I do think they can hone specific skills. So if your leadership training is focused on, let's say, improving communication, your number
Hmm.
one item, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can teach people how to communicate better. You can give them some tools in a
Hmm.
week that they'll
Yeah.
walk away and they'll be better communicators.
Yeah.
Conflict resolution is another one. We can teach people how to handle conflict.
Yeah.
We can teach people how to be resilient. So we can provide training there. But I don't think the full complement of leadership skills that are necessary in today's, ever challenging
Yeah.
business environment uh, can do that in a week's worth of training. And when I talk to folks whom I coach about their leadership training, all of them have been through leadership training of some
Yeah.
part or another. I ask them, how much do you retain? They're like, very little. Within 2 weeks, I forget most of what I'm saying. What's it like with coaching? It's different. Why is it different? Well, you're here every week. You're spending time with me reinforcing this stuff every week for months at a time.
Yeah.
So I'm actually practicing stuff. I'm getting feedback. I'm coming back to you with more ideas. You're giving me more things to think about. I'm practicing those. And slowly over that period of 4 or 6 months of work together, I'm a different person now.
Yeah.
And things like self-awareness to me is a huge part of the coaching model. And I don't think you can teach that so much in a week. Self-talk, another important part. We're talking to ourselves all day long, right?
Yeah.
And yet, you know, we think that leaders are going to be somehow different because of a title. Well, no, they're the same person they were when they were an incredible individual contributor, right? And whatever hangups and problems and foibles or whatever, they still have those, and they bring those now into a group of people that they can impact, and sometimes not for the good. What do you think are some of the other sort of common misconceptions about leadership training? You know, what what impact did some of these training programs have, and where do they fall short?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think, to your point around, how much do you remember going back? I think it was, maybe it was Peter Drucker. You might know this statement, or no, it wasn't. It was Edward Deming who said, "You put a good person in a bad system, the bad system wins every time." Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this whole sense of like, yeah, you can go, good person goes off to good training, but they go back to this old existing system and all the old habits. And as we know, it's
Yeah.
so easy for little habits to take over. I know before we got on camera today, you and I were talking. I mentioned one of the things that I have been doing is this 30-day leadership challenge because.
Mm,
And it's micro learning. So it's, people are spending 10 minutes a day, but it's drip, 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 drip every day. And it starts to change things because they're getting it, first of all, over the course of a month and a little bit at a time. And the focus is not so much in the learning, it's in like, oh, here's an idea. Now go spend the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of your life today applying this and thinking about this and keeping it
mm,
top of mind.
mm,
Because I think one of the challenges, you talked about, I love your tip of leadership as a choice. I see a lot of leaders, and I ask this of groups when I'm with them too, is like, how many of you, besides being leaders of people, also are individual contributors? You have your own projects you have to do.
mm,
So, and almost every hand goes up, right? And so they're wearing two hats. They're player and coach, right? So they are
mm,
coaching, but they're playing. And what they tend to say is, yeah, I know I should be doing this more, but I just don't have the time, right?
mm,
Because they see developing their people and coaching them, developing, leading them. They see that as this cost. And so one of my big suggestions, and this seems to resonate because I've had a lot of people come back and say, that's really good, is you got to stop thinking of this as a cost. You've got to start thinking of this as an investment because
mm.
that's exactly what it is. It's
Yeah.
like you have to invest in helping people understand why they're doing what they're doing, how they're doing it, and not just like what. The what is this, the deliverable. And again, most people in most roles and organizations, they're really good doers in their technical expertise. I've met lots of people and rarely do I question their smarts around whether they're in marketing or sales or
Mm,
operations or finance. They're good. They know that stuff. But ask me, are they as good at, having dealing with conflict, like you're
mhm,
saying, like having clear communication, being able to be proactive? No, they're not so good there because they don't focus on that. And they also haven't, going back to the original question, they haven't been schooled in that stuff. So
mhm,
I think there's a place for schooling, but then it also has to have a culture that when you come back into it is reinforcing it. So I'm a big fan of working with executives and executive teams. Like, look, you're the model for all this stuff, and you have
yeah.
to be the champions for
Right.
people when they come back. And so if they're coming back and they're not doing what we is now the new normal, you have to call people on it. I mean, you can do it caringly, but you have to call them on what's going on here, because otherwise you're going to get stuck and you're going to basically go in this cycle of you're putting all this money and time and energy into this training. People come back and nothing changes.
Yeah, I really love that first point you made about the idea that you shouldn't view this as a cost. It's a mindset shift, I think,
Yeah.
on the part of folks that are acquiring, yeah, services of people like you and I. That they're looking at it like, oh, this is too expensive, and I kind of ask, well, is it really expensive if I'm able to help retain customers?
Yeah.
Is it really expensive if I'm able to produce flawless execution, you
Yeah.
know, within the business? Is it really a cost like that's not worth paying if I'm not, able to create an environment that attracts the best and brightest people on the planet? To an earlier point you made, like it is a pretty transparent world out there right now,
Yeah.
and you can't hide from it. If you've
Yeah.
got the type of company culture that's toxic, it's out there. People know it. They know to avoid it. And the best people don't want to work in toxic places. So you're
Yeah.
not getting those folks. But if we change the way the leaders operate, we have a chance to change the culture. And I think, back to one of the biggest sort of issues around leadership training versus coaching is I think training is very theoretical, even in those places where we've got case studies
Yeah. Yeah.
and things like that. I mean, it's still applying a theory.
Yeah.
It doesn't get real until people start to actually behave differently.
Yeah.
And that's where I think coaching can really make the difference. We can get at behavior modification, behavior change, and help, if we're good coaches, help people actually operate differently. And once people behave differently, then we change the culture and the way the rest of the organization actually performs, you know? Here's a thought question, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get there with you, but I'm interested in your take on this, and it gets to a point you made earlier about, is it an investment or is it a cost?
Mhm.
If I'm a CHRO and I've got $1,000 to spend on each person, am I wise to spend it on coaching or leadership training? What's your thought?
Oh, I've got $1,000 to spend on each person. So I think oftentimes that conversation is answered before it begins. And what I mean by that is so often I talk to people and they've already kind of figured out, okay, we have these 2 days in June scheduled and we can do some training. And then it's like it gets all
Yeah,
backfilled. I think,
yeah, yeah.
and
It's
to
an
me,
afterthought.
it's an afterthought. And so to me, whether it's training or coaching, to me, it comes back to what are the outcomes that you're looking for? Like, what are you really wanting to change? And I'm always amazed when I ask clients, because I'm sure you do too. What's the outcome you want here? Like, oh, that's a really good question. I hadn't thought of that because they're already down this should road of like, oh, well, we should train our people or we should coach our people. And look, I mean, my sense is there's things that you can do. I like to think of coaching as individualized, bespoke leadership training, right?
Yes,
And it's,
absolutely.
and it is basically and the content is the canvas of your life. Like you're bringing your stuff and in that one-on-one kind of setting, you're able to do some pretty amazing things, right? In
Yeah.
terms of that, because it's completely tailored to that person. And there's the whole sense of personal accountability. So there's amazing stuff. However, it's also in terms of from a cost benefit, like it's more expensive because scalable, you can't do as many people. One of the things that I found really useful sometimes is to do group coaching, as
Yeah.
we're doing group coaching because, we might have people work in small groups, come back together and then take one person's issue and walk it through the whole group. And surprise, surprise, other people go, that's my issue too. And suddenly it normalizes people's experience of, oh,
Hmm.
I thought I was the only one dealing with this. And suddenly they now have this support. So that can be a way to scale coaching in a more economical way if you can't afford the one-on-one. Ideally, every single person would have their own individual coach, if you can make that work. And then at the same time, there is a time and a place for leadership development training. There's a time,
Absolutely.
but it
Yeah.
comes back to what are the outcomes, and beyond the outcomes, what are your expectations? Like, what do you think this is going to do? When I was first got into this field 27 years ago, I was a bit naive and idealistic. I would feel like, oh, people are going to come away from my 4 hour, 8 hour training day and they're going to be changed. And you know what? Maybe 1% on the bell curve is going to like take that and run with it. But everyone else is somewhere further along the bell curve and they need more support. So I think ultimately it comes down to, what are you going to do? What's your outcome? And then pick the modality that's going to serve that outcome best.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and I think that's the right model. I think you do have to see, well, what am I trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
If I know I've got a lot of friction in the organization, then maybe conflict resolution training is absolutely the thing I should do, and I got to put
Yeah.
everybody through it.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, I'm trying to build a community of leaders and I want them to be inspiring and motivational to my staff, then maybe I need to figure out how to integrate coaching in there too.
Yeah.
And it's not every single person, right? It's the people that need it the most or
Yeah.
could benefit by it, or the people I'm trying to prepare for the next level and so on.
Yeah.
So, hey, look, we're kind of at that point where we've got time for one more question. So I want to tee this one up. I know you're going to hit it out of the park, but what's the one thought or idea you'd like to leave with the audience today,
Wow. I'm going to hit that part. No pressure. No pressure, Jim.
Alon? you're
So
gonna you're gonna put that frisbee through the hoop.
yeah, there we go. Exactly. So I want to go back to what you said. This idea of I really it somehow resonated with me. This sense of leadership is a choice. So I'm stealing from your words, but I think
Mm,
beyond, like, if we unpack that a little bit more, it's around what can you do to recognize the importance and the power that leaders bring, and what are you doing to continually upskill your game around it?
mhm,
And
mhm.
I'd say, and whether that's, oftentimes I'll say, first of all, get feedback from other people. Get feedback. It's so important because you can't see yourself the way they do. And that's what's important. So get feedback and commit yourself. If you're on this path of leadership, then commit yourself to getting better. Right? Like, it's a path, it's a journey. It's not a I've arrived. And it's easy to fall into that step. Like, look at my title. I'm a senior executive, etc.,
Right,
CEO, whatever.
right,
That is a snapshot in time. Like, we
right.
all have the capacity to get better. So I would say continue to choose to get better in whatever way you're doing it.
Yeah, I love it. And that ties back to that whole idea about being deliberate about it. And yes, leadership's a choice. I'll go to tip number 2 in the book. This is how I want to leave one thought for our audience today. And that's that notion that leadership's about them and not us. And it's kind of amplifying your idea about seeking feedback all the time,
Yeah,
because we don't really know how we're, being perceived out there unless we ask, right?
totally.
So it's really, really important to remember that. And leadership is really about the other people. It's not about you. It's not about being the smartest guy in the room or anything like that. It's about the people you're leading. Can I get them to bust through the door and, accomplish what we've set out to accomplish together as a group? So with that, again, Alain, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. Um, and I hope folks got a lot out of this indispensable conversation. I know I thought it was indispensable.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim.
So long, everyone.
Bye.